Last month, we looked at the idea of always be recruiting, and we looked at something specifically called the people bank, really, but this idea of always being on the lookout for good people rather than just being desperate when we actually need somebody, and then of course maybe not finding the ideal candidate. And we left you with the challenge that was around what's that next role or that next function that you're going to stop doing, and how are you going to make that happen, whether it's to automate or to outsource or to potentially recruit to fill that gap. So that's what we did last month. This month is around something called the InFlight Checks, and I'll come to the detail of what that is in a minute. This is our own InFlight Checks based on some really sound thinking from lots of people, a lot cleverer than us, but we've collated it into a kind of a checklist that enables us to see where some of the gaps are, see where some of the weaknesses are in our journey on scaling up around those 4 pillars of scaling up. And why do we think this is important? Why do we need to do anything like this at all? Well, essentially, only around about 4% of businesses in this country do scale up beyond the 10 employee level, or roughly £1 million sort of turnover. And that's the typical level at which a business is likely to be able to make us as the owners really financially secure. So it's a big milestone to get to, and we certainly, part of what we're about is understanding some of the reasons why not everybody either gets there or gets beyond there, but also then helping people to want to achieve that. And one of the things that we've done recently is a ScaleUp Challenges report, and you can certainly contact us and ask us to send all the details through to that. But we identified essentially 5 key conclusions as to why people don't scale up. Within the report itself, we then teased out a lot of the specific challenges that people have at those different stages of that scale up journey. And as well as some of these things like desire and confidence to do it, but understanding around the personality and the leadership requirements of growing a larger business, there's that understanding what it really takes to scale. And it's not just that awareness, but it's about understanding that journey, and then focusing on culture, team engagement, and overcoming that chicken and the egg idea with, if we knew that the business was going to return a huge amount of money to us, then we'd put in a lot of money at the beginning if we had to invest to do it. But of course, if we're not sure that it's going to be a return, then we're a bit hesitant to put the money in. So there's that confidence and the idea of the owner's trap. But one of the key things that separates those of us, or those that succeed, from those that don't, are around habits, essentially, and good habits. So really great ideas in business clearly help, that moment of inspiration or something that you're doing that's really special, that's different. But without strong habits, good habits within the business, then we're unlikely to be able to capitalize on those ideas. But you don't actually, in business, to be successful, have to have an idea that nobody else has thought of. If you simply are really good at some of the fundamental basics of the business, of the sort of things we would call the habits, then you can separate yourself out from the majority of businesses, and then should be able to succeed. So it's not just about having great ideas. It's really fundamental to get these world-class basics, as people in the sports world talk about it. So world-class fundamentals, world-class basics are quite commonly talked about in team sports like rugby and football, in getting those really basic skills and habits absolutely perfect, as well as then maybe the occasional moment of superb talent. And there's a couple of really good books to read, and one in particular, there's one called Atomic Habits, and it's about tiny changes leading to remarkable results, and that's by a gentleman called James Clear, Atomic Habits. So if anybody wants to read up a little bit more on that, then that's certainly something to do. So I'm going to introduce you to the idea of checklists before I get into our specific one about the InFlight checks. And a checklist may sound a basic thing, but they're used increasingly now in all sorts of different aspects. Though anybody that's familiar with the medical world or the flying world will know that they're beginning to be used all the time. In fact, the flying world has used them ever since pretty much people started flying. And it's not because people aren't clever enough to get things right on their own. It's because as the complexity of our world increases and our collective knowledge essentially has exceeded the capacity of any individual to get things right all the time, however clever we might be or might think we are, or we might think our people are, we need to have some checklists to make sure that we don't miss things and things don't get overlooked. And there's another great book here from a chap called Atul Gawande, and it's called the Checklist Manifesto. And he looks in there at the power of checklists and how they can, particularly in the medical world, they save lives. So you've got very highly qualified medics, but even they make mistakes and they forget to do things. And if they've got a checklist that's been pre-sorted through, and ideally there's somebody else that is getting them to do that checklist, so it's not just one person that's kind of going, oh yeah, I've done all those things, but it's actually there's a double check on it, if you like, then it can make a powerful difference. Granger, I don't know whether you wanted to pitch in here and say anything about the checklist idea.
Yeah, so the checklist is a very powerful technique. It's used an awful lot in the quality world as well. So when we're looking at our processes and looking at our systems, again, it's very easy to forget and miss some things. So using a checklist with your teams to remember that everything is done before the work is dispatched or sent or finished for the customer is a very powerful activity. And the Checklist Manifesto, as Kevin said, is a great book. I highly recommend it in terms of reading. And one of the other powers of the checklist is it's usually read out by somebody else in the team. So it's not read by the leader. It's somebody else in the team taking ownership and calling it out. And that way you get a real power of it. That's the true benefit of getting a checklist to work within teams.
So if you think about the airline pilot here, thank you, Granger. Think about the airline pilot. Then you've typically got the second in command that is potentially reading out those checklists. And I come from a flying background early in my career in the Air Force, and we'd have checks for everything. So you'd have your walk around checks outside of the aircraft before you even get in the aircraft. You've then got your pre-start checks once you're sat in the cockpit, and you would go through all those various things, and you have a number of checks. And some of those checks you're simply reading out from a checklist. You've literally got a flip chart, a flip booklet with all those checks on. Others, then you're expected to know off by heart. So clearly, when you have an engine failure, you don't really want to be hunting around for the appropriate page with the checks on. You want to know those off by heart. And by doing those, then having it that way, it's not a case of being rigid and not being able to be creative, because what it does is it means that you are able to devote your brain power to other things. You can just get those checks out the way, and you know you've done those, and you can then concentrate, in the case of an engine fire, on actually think about how am I going to find a place for this aircraft to land and get down, rather than thinking, hang on, which switch am I supposed to switch off next, and how do I stop the fuel to the to that engine that's on fire, and all of those things. So checklists are very powerful in all sorts of aspects, and business is no exception. So one of the takeaways from the sessions this morning might be about thinking, where would it be appropriate to have some specific checks? Because part of checks are the timing. When do you do it? So the pre-flight checks, obviously, that's the moment you do them, is pre-flight. So you do those, and then at a different point you get in the cockpit. Now I know I'm doing this next set of checks. Well, it's the same within business. So think about how checklists might be useful to you. So part of the work we've done with understanding the challenges around scaling up and knowing that at those different stages there are specific things that we need to look at, allows us to start to think about developing the checklist. So we know that our key focus as we scale up changes. So early on, then essentially our key strategic focus is around making sure we've got product market fit and we've got a scalable business model. And essentially, as a business owner, we've got to basically roll our sleeves up, get down and dirty, and do a lot of the work. But then as we start to have some success, we need to think about getting more reliable and repeatable lead generation activities, for example, in place, so that we've got a nice constant stream of leads coming in. And we need to start, as a leader, focusing on where we might add most value and delegate the things that we don't need to do. Now, I'm not going to go through the detail of these, because as I say, you can request our Scale Up Challenges report, and we'll be delighted to send that to you. But what it has enabled us to do then is to think about, okay, well, those 4 pillars, what's the right frequency to be having a look at some of these things, and what should we be doing within each of those pillars to know that we're doing the strategy right? You know, all the things we're missing within strategy, or the people, or the execution, or the cash. And as I say, it's about habits, as I said earlier, and that's what we've done with the InFlight checks. Now, this is we've got the InFlight checks on our 90-day planning software, and Sam is going to go through some more detail of this and later. But this is from Sam's team, and you can see that the output from this has enabled each of his team members. So Granger was talking about the power of other people kind of doing these checks as well. This enables you to see the output from some of the key aspects from each of his team members. And of course, what that means is you can go, well, actually, it looks like everybody reckons we're a bit weak, maybe on being focused on valuable growth here. So what does that mean? So let's have a look at the detail of what that means. And that might be a priority area that we need to focus on. But equally, you might look in other places and go, well, there's somebody out here that thinks we're quite good at business development activities, providing a predictable stream of on-profile clients, but the rest of us don't. So what's the reason for that discrepancy there? And is that maybe something we need to think about as well? So it highlights areas that we might need to think about either discussing more and working more, or that we might need to think about actually putting some improvement initiatives in place. So Sam's going to talk a little bit more about how he uses those within his business in just a moment. This is a little summary. So what we've provided for you for today, and we'll put it in the chat before the breakout rooms, is a file which just a 2-pager, which is a light version of our InFlight checks, so that you've got a summary version essentially of them, so that you can do those within your breakouts and have a look at some of the key things within there. You can self-rate essentially how you are, and then you can have a discussion about it. If you'd like to discuss that in a bit more detail with us, or even have the access to the full InFlight checks through us, then you can book a call with either Granger if you're based in Gloucestershire, or with myself or one of the rest of us if you're based in Worcestershire or Birmingham or elsewhere, using the QR codes that you'll have at the top of the sheet. So I'm not going to go through the detail of the various sections, but you can see how it's structured, you know, with strategy, some of the key things we need to be thinking about and asking within there. Let's say this is our light version of it. So that's really what I wanted to talk through from my perspective. So it's about where might checklists be appropriate for you within your business, but also then specifically we'll have a look at the InFlight checks and see if those if going through this exercise throws up some areas that we might need to be thinking about next and prioritizing in order to improve our business. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to Sam for a few minutes, if I may. So Sam runs the SL shop, which is Europe's leading Mercedes SL classic car business, both in terms of sales, restorations, but also in terms of parts. It's a sizable business. He's built a great business over a few years. Sam, over to you, if I may.
There we are. I'm unmuted. Morning, everyone. Kevin, thank you for that. Thank you for today's introduction. I think, I suspect the reason why you've invited me on here is that I am almost evangelical, that's the word, isn't it, about your InFlight checks. And for me, as a business owner, you know, I've owned this business for 15 years. Prior to that, I had a proper job in the corporate world. But for me, through all of the books that I've read, all of the advice that I've taken, all of the growth that I've attempted with my business and with myself, this InFlight check is probably the most powerful tool that I can recommend that you get your head into as a business owner. And for me, what it does, and Kevin touched on it earlier, is it brings together probably the most pertinent, the most important aspects of running your business, and it holds you accountable. That's what's important for me. It holds you accountable. You know what it's like as a self-employed person. Sometimes we fool ourselves that we're doing the right thing. Sometimes we think, yeah, I know what I'm doing. It's all good. It's heading in the right direction. And then you take a cold, hard look at your business with a tool like this, and you say to yourself, actually, I am a bit shit at that side of the business, or we're not quite so good here and not quite so good there. And the other thing is, when you read those kind of business growth books and self-help books and whatever else, you after you read a few of them, you begin to realize that there's a common theme in those books, and there's probably only a certain number of themes that get repeated through all of the books and YouTube videos and whatever else that you can watch. And what Kevin and Bismarck has done is condense them all into that single in-flight check, and I think it is a brilliant document to hold us as business owners accountable and to make sure that the business is going in the right direction. Kevin touched earlier on one of our management team's first attempt actually at doing this. We've been doing it, the senior managers, myself and my two colleagues, have been doing this for probably 18 months now, but just at the last quarter, we all had a go. All sort of 5 or 6 senior folks had a go at it, and it's really interesting to see people's perspective, people's personality is very different. And Kevin touched on one of those people who were further out on the sales side. I think it was lead generation side. Well, it won't surprise anybody to know that was the sales manager. So the sales manager is really confident in his lead generation, and then the finance people are less confident in it all. So when you do give the task to your wider team, you begin to understand not only probably some of the personalities and how people view things, but also, you know, where those themes are, and if any aspect of your management team are deluded about what they're achieving, this kind of brings everybody back down to earth. And, you know, those of us that have got a sort of a sales and marketing drive tend to be more optimistic than those, the sort of finance accounting, that tend to be more pessimistic with their scores. But like I said, for me, it is an amazing tool that absolutely brings everything back down to earth. And you know what it's like when you're running your business. You as the scale up pillars show, you begin, you've got loads of energy, you can disrupt the market, you think your ideas are better than anyone else's, and you form great relationships with customers and staff. And then over time, as the business grows, those core things that got you off the ground and got your business running, you begin to sometimes lose sight of. You know, you sometimes lose sight of the connection you've got with the staff, and ultimately the connection you've got with your customers. So for example, for me, one of the really important bits I like is the people section, because it just, again, brings me back down to earth. And I ask myself some of these questions, you know, do I really clearly communicate, you know, the core values to all staff? Does everybody feel it? Can everybody recall them? Does everybody know how we're doing on a performance basis, month on month, quarter on quarter? And the answer quite often is no, we don't. You know, I don't include the staff as much as I could, as I'd like to. So, I mean, I've picked one at one side there, and you know, we can look at the strategy and execution, but cash, for example, you know, all that kind of stuff is my personal weakness. You know, I've got a right-hand lady, Sue, who's absolutely brilliant at the administration and the accounts and the cash side of the business, and she's always challenging me if I can remember the 7 levers. I can't remember the bloody 7 levers. That's her job. But you know, for me, she probably wouldn't know what one of our key customers looks like. So that's kind of my job. So we come together as a team, and this document holds the whole business accountable to what we should be doing. I think it is probably one of the best tools that I've come across in the 15 years that I've been running the business. I think it's absolute genius. I really do. And Kevin hasn't paid me to say that, although you probably can get me a pint if you want to, Kevin.
I'm sure we could do that, Sam. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Really appreciate that. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for sharing that. So are you okay? See if people got a couple of questions for you, Sam? Yeah. So let's have a look at that. So anybody got a question for Sam? And you may have to use the the facility to raise your hand using the reactions buttons, because I'm not necessarily able to see everybody at the same time. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, either using the reactions. Any questions?
That either means I've done a brilliant job or a terrible job. I don't know, Kevin, so I'm going to go for the brilliant.
Kevin, we have a question from Stu. Stu's raised his hand.
Yeah, great. Stu.
Yeah, great presentation and stuff. Quick thought then. So I know that the smart kind of checklist and stuff is done on the 90 days, but actually, do you do that every month with your team, or do you still do it on a quarterly basis? So what's the frequency of sort of how often you do that checklist?
Yeah, we have weekly Smart 90 meetings for a couple of hours. The senior team. We have a monthly look at this in-flight check, and then quarterly a wider session on it. And what we're thinking of doing is actually making ourselves accountable for each of the 4 pillars. So you know, for example, I touched on people, so you know that's really important to me. My right-hand lady Sue will take hold of strategy, and another one of the directors will take hold of execution. So we're almost sort of challenging ourselves to increase the scores in each of those areas. And we kind of look back at whether it's the month or the quarter and say, well, we scored ourselves 2 out of 5 on that one. What have we actually done differently to do something about it? What have we as a business changed to increase our score on that? And if we haven't done anything, then there's no point in kidding ourselves. We're not going to get any better at it. So
brilliant. Thank you very much. Really helpful.
Thank you, Stu.
I'm going to say, I'm just going to, at the risk of sounding like a broken record and people switching off and losing the will to live here, I wish I'd have had this tool when I started out, because the business has grown through hard graft and determination and doing the right thing by our customers and our staff. But I can tell you now, if I'd had this right at the start, my business would be in a much more secure, stable and profitable place than it is now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Sam. Well, yeah, I wasn't expecting quite such a ringing endorsement, but that's fantastic. Very much appreciated, Sam. Thank you for that.